The town of Red Willow had never been kind to anyone who was different. Its dusty streets were filled with whispers, stares, and the occasional cruel laughter aimed at those who could not conform. Among the outcasts was a young blind girl named Lila. She had grown up in the margins of the community, her days marked by the sharp sting of rejection and the quiet ache of loneliness. Her world was defined by sound, touch, and the faint scents of the wildflowers that grew near the riverbank, a small comfort in a life dominated by disdain. From the moment she was born, the villagers had looked at her with pity, then annoyance. Her blindness made her helpless in their eyes. She could not fetch water quickly, could not carry out the tasks expected of a child her age, and could not see the signs of danger that others took for granted. Because of this, she was often left behind, ignored, or teased mercilessly by children and adults alike. Doors that should have opened in welcome remained closed, and hands that should have guided her often pushed her aside. One afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent behind the hills, Lila sat near the edge of the town square, listening to the murmur of townsfolk as they went about their business. She had long since learned to recognize footsteps, to gauge distance from sounds, and to map the world in her mind through the echoes of voices and the rhythm of daily life. Yet even with these skills, she could not avoid the stinging cruelty of the world around her. On that day, the mockery reached a crescendo. Children threw stones near her feet, calling her names that cut deeper than any wound. The adults looked on with thinly veiled amusement, their eyes cold and indifferent. Lila's heart sank, and tears, hot and unrelenting, rolled silently down her cheeks. She whispered to herself, "Nobody wants me. Nobody will ever care." She felt smaller than she had ever felt before, trapped in a world that offered her nothing but rejection. It was at that moment that a figure appeared at the edge of the square. A tall, broad-shouldered Apache warrior rode calmly into town, his presence commanding attention without a word. His eyes, sharp and assessing, scanned the scene and fell upon Lila. In her trembling figure and the sorrow etched into her posture, he saw something that no one else did: resilience, courage, and an untapped strength. Without hesitation, he dismounted and knelt beside her, his hand steady and gentle. Lila flinched, unused to kindness, and his voice broke the silence. "Come with me. You do not belong here." There was no judgment, only an offer of safety, a chance to be seen and valued for who she truly was. With careful movements, he lifted her onto his horse, supporting her with a strength that reassured rather than intimidated. The villagers watched, mouths agape, as the Apache swung into the saddle and, without another word, rode out of Red Willow with Lila clinging safely before him. For the first time in her life, she felt the exhilaration of possibility, of a future unshackled by cruelty. The wind brushed her face, carrying the scent of open plains and wildflowers, and she realized that this journey was not just an escape, it was a beginning. As the town disappeared behind the hills, Lila felt a stirring she had never known: hope. Though blind, she could sense the world opening around her, full of new sounds, scents, and the promise of acceptance. For the first time, someone had chosen her, not despite her blindness, but with full recognition of her worth. And for Lila, that simple act of courage and compassion would mark the start of a life she had never dared to imagine. The wind whipped past Lila as the horse carried her farther from Red Willow than she had ever gone before. The sound of hooves against the dry earth became a rhythm she could follow, and though she could not see the landscape stretching wide beneath the fading sun, she felt the vastness of the world opening around her. For the first time, she realized that life could be more than narrow streets and cold glances. It could be wide, unpredictable, and full of possibility. The Apache, whose name she would soon learn was Takoda, guided the horse with confidence, his eyes scanning the horizon while his voice occasionally spoke in low, steady tones. "The trail is rough ahead, but the plains will offer you rest. Trust me." His words were firm but gentle, giving Lila the assurance that she was no longer alone, and that she was being cared for with purpose. As night approached, Takoda stopped near a shallow creek. The sound of flowing water, gentle and constant, comforted Lila. For months, she had lived in the shadow of fear and neglect, but here, in the wild, she could hear life itself singing around her. Takoda dismounted and helped her down from the horse, guiding her to the water's edge. He showed her how to cup her hands and drink, carefully explaining each movement so she could follow. Lila's heart swelled with gratitude. The smallest acts of kindness felt monumental after a lifetime of being ignored. Around the campfire that night, Lila listened to Takoda speak of the land, the animals, and the stars above. She had never heard stories like these, stories of survival, of courage, and of living in harmony with nature. He did not speak down to her, nor did he treat her as fragile. Instead, he shared knowledge, teaching her how to navigate by sound, how to sense the movement of animals, and how to feel the wind to know which direction to take. Each lesson was a thread in the tapestry of independence he was weaving for her. Despite the calm of the evening, Lila's fears were not gone. Questions raced through her mind. Where were they going? Could she trust him completely? What if the world beyond Red Willow was even harsher? She was silent, letting her thoughts tumble in her head, until Takoda's voice broke through. "You are stronger than you think. You have lived in fear, but now you will learn to move through the world with power, not doubt." His words were not empty promises. They carried a weight that made Lila feel the truth in them. Over the following days, their journey tested her in ways she had never imagined. Steep hills forced her to rely on Takoda's guidance and the rhythm of the horse. Sudden storms drenched them and made the trail slippery, yet through every challenge, he remained a steady presence. Lila began to notice a change in herself. Her confidence grew, her senses sharpened, and her trust in Takoda deepened. She learned to feel the slope of the land with her feet, to sense the proximity of trees, and even to anticipate the approach of wildlife by subtle shifts in the wind and sounds around her. One evening, as they camped atop a ridge overlooking a vast valley, Lila whispered into the quiet night, "I never thought anyone would see me." "Really see me?" Takoda's voice was soft, almost a murmur, but it carried across the cool air. "I see you." And that is enough. For Lila, that moment became a turning point. She understood that life could be cruel and heartless, but there were those rare souls who could offer understanding and protection. Takoda had become her guide, her protector, and unknowingly her teacher in resilience and hope. And as the stars sparkled above, she felt the stirrings of a future she had never dared to dream, a future where she was not defined by her blindness, but by the courage, wisdom, and heart she was discovering within herself. The days grew longer and hotter as Takoda and Lila traveled deeper into the open plains. The land was beautiful, but it was also unpredictable, full of hidden dangers that Lila had never imagined. Takoda had taught her how to sense subtle changes, the rustle of grass indicating a nearby animal, the hum of the wind signaling an approaching storm, but nothing could have prepared her for the challenge that lay ahead. It was mid-morning when they first heard the distant cries. At first, Lila thought it was the wind, but the sharpness of Takoda's gaze told her otherwise. "Bandits," he said quietly, his hand resting on the bough strapped to his back. "We need to move carefully." Lila's heart pounded in her chest. The idea of danger had always been abstract, something she had read about in stories or imagined from warnings. Now it was real, tangible, and close. Takoda slowed the horse and guided Lila into a narrow canyon, the walls rising steeply on either side. He whispered instructions, his voice calm and precise, teaching her to trust her senses even more. She reached out with her hands to feel the horse's mane, the uneven ground beneath them, and the subtle vibrations that warned of approaching footsteps. Each step became a lesson in intuition and concentration. The bandits appeared suddenly, their shadows stretching across the canyon floor. They were rough, armed men, and one shouted, demanding Takoda surrender the girl. Lila froze at first, but she remembered his teachings. She remembered that she had strength she hadn't known. Takoda placed a firm hand on her shoulder. Trust the horse. Trust yourself. With his guidance, Lila shifted slightly, steadying herself. The horse moved with practiced ease, stepping carefully through the rocks, avoiding sudden noises that might provoke the attackers. Takoda's bow sang through the air, arrows flying with precision, creating openings for their escape. Lila felt the rush of the horse beneath her, the pounding of hooves, and a strange exhilaration. She realized she was no longer entirely helpless. She was a participant in her survival. By the time the canyon opened into a wide valley, the bandits were left behind, cursing but unable to follow the terrain with the same skill. Lila's breathing was heavy, but it was no longer fear that filled her, it was determination. She had faced danger and, with Takoda by her side, survived. She began to understand what it meant to be truly seen. Someone believed in her, guided her, and protected her, not out of pity but out of respect. That night, as they camped near a stream, Lila spoke quietly, almost to herself. I never imagined I could do that. I thought I'd always be a burden. Takoda looked at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. You are not a burden. You are capable. Courage is not measured by sight, but by the heart. Today you showed both. Lila's lips curved into a small, shy smile. For the first time, she felt pride in herself. Not dependent on anyone else's approval. The journey continued in silence for a while, each of them reflecting on the day's events. Lila ran her fingers over the contours of her horse, listening to the gentle swish of water nearby, feeling the world in ways she had never been forced to before. She began to trust that she could navigate danger, rely on her instincts, and even anticipate threats in ways that were uniquely her own. By dawn, the plains stretched endlessly before them, a world full of possibility but also unknown perils. Lila realized that her life had changed irreversibly. She was no longer the blind girl abandoned by Red Willow. She was someone learning to live fully, someone capable of bravery and resilience. Takoda had not just carried her away, he had begun to teach her how to carry herself through a world that had never valued her before. For Lila, the plains were no longer intimidating. They were an invitation to discover her strength, her courage, and the freedom that had been denied to her for so long. And as the sun rose over the horizon, she felt a quiet thrill. This was only the beginning of her journey, and she was ready to meet it head-on. The days on the plains had begun to blend together, each marked by the rhythm of Takoda's horse and the whisper of the wind through the tall grasses. Lila had grown more confident in her ability to navigate this new world, guided by sound, touch, and the subtle cues that Takoda had taught her to notice. But nature, as she was about to learn, could be as unpredictable and merciless as the humans she had left behind in Red Willow. It began with a distant rumble. At first, Lila thought it was thunder, though the sky was cloudless. The vibrations underfoot grew stronger, and Takoda's expression hardened. Earthquake, he said softly, his eyes scanning the horizon for signs of danger. Lila's heart skipped a beat. She had never felt the ground move beneath her in such a way, and fear prickled through her body. Takoda quickly guided the horse to a clearing near a grove of sturdy trees. Stay close to me, he instructed, his voice calm but firm. The ground may crack and we must be ready to react. Lila wrapped her arms around his waist, holding on tightly as the first tremors shook the earth. Rocks tumbled from the hillside, and the creek beside them roared louder as it shifted with the trembling ground. She could feel the panic in the horse, its muscles tensing beneath her. But Takoda's steady presence became an anchor in the chaos. The earthquake intensified, and Lila realized that survival would require more than fear, it would require action. She remembered the lessons Takoda had taught her about sensing the land, about anticipating danger before it arrived. She pressed her hands against the horse's neck, feeling the rhythm of its breathing, the changes in its movement, the vibrations of the shifting earth. Her senses, honed by necessity, allowed her to anticipate the horse's next steps and respond instinctively. Suddenly, a small rock slide threatened to block their path. Takoda shouted instructions, and Lila reacted without hesitation, leaning with the horse as it stepped around the debris. The tremors shook the clearing, but she stayed centered, trusting both her instincts and the guidance of the man who had rescued her from a life of rejection. For the first time, she felt a powerful sense of agency, not just surviving, but actively shaping her survival. When the quake finally subsided, the world around them was transformed. Trees had fallen, the creek had carved a new path through the plains, and the once smooth terrain was now jagged and uneven. Lila dismounted carefully, running her hands over the uneven ground, sensing the changes, feeling the new landscape as though it were a map pressed into her palms. She was exhausted, her muscles trembling, but the thrill of having endured something so immense filled her with pride. Takoda looked at her with a mixture of respect and admiration. "You were remarkable," he said quietly. "Many would have frozen in fear. But you adapted. You trusted yourself." Lila felt a warmth bloom in her chest. The words were not mere praise, they were recognition. She had faced a force of nature that would have terrified anyone, yet she had responded with awareness and courage. That night, as they camped under a sky crowded with stars, Lila reflected on the day's events. The plains had tested her in ways she had never imagined, and she realized that her blindness did not define her limitations. It revealed her unique strengths. With Takoda's guidance, she had learned to navigate danger, trust herself, and find confidence in her instincts. For the first time, she understood that life beyond Red Willow was not only possible, it could be rich, challenging, and full of growth. The plains stretched endlessly before them, a landscape of freedom, and Lila felt a thrill unlike anything she had known. She had survived the quake, learned from it, and discovered the depths of her own courage. And as Takoda watched over her, she knew that this journey was only beginning, and that she had the strength to meet whatever lay ahead. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of wild sage and the distant echo of birdsong. Lila sat astride the horse, feeling the familiar rhythm beneath her as Takoda led them through a narrow canyon. The landscape had shifted dramatically since the earthquake, and every step required focus. She had learned to trust her senses, but the plains were unpredictable, and Takoda's silent vigilance reminded her that danger was never far. Away that it was then that they heard the first warning, a low, guttural growl, distant at first, then closer. Lila froze, feeling the vibration through the horse's body. "Bear," Takoda said calmly, scanning the canyon walls. "We need to stay quiet and move slowly," Lila's heart pounded. But she remembered his lessons about patience, awareness, and reading the environment. She adjusted her grip on the horse, relaxed her body, and allowed her senses to guide her as the bear emerged from the shadows. Massive and imposing, Lila realized the full weight of the moment. She had faced natural disasters before, but this was a living, breathing predator. Takoda guided the horse along a narrow ledge, speaking softly to Lila about each movement. She leaned into the horse's balance, following his voice and trusting the rhythm of the animal beneath her. Step by careful step, they navigated the canyon, the bear trailing but hesitant, unsure whether to pursue. Once they reached a safer ridge, Lila dismounted, guided by Takoda to a thicket of bush that offered concealment. Her hands brushed the leaves and rough bark, feeling the environment as though mapping it with her fingertips. Takoda whispered instructions for positioning and movement, and she realized that she could sense the bear's approach even without sight, anticipating its shifts in weight and direction through subtle vibrations in the ground and the sounds of snapping twigs. For hours, they waited in tense silence, hearts pounding in rhythm with the earth. Lila's confidence grew with each passing minute. She had learned to read the world differently, and now, under real threat, she applied her skills instinctively. The bear eventually wandered off, distracted by the scent of distant prey. Relief washed over Lila, but she also felt a thrill. She had survived and in some small way contributed to their survival. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the plains, they resumed their journey. Takoda spoke little, but his occasional glances conveyed pride. "You are learning," he said softly. "You trust your instincts, your senses. That is more important than sight." Lila smiled, feeling the truth of his words resonate deep within her. For the first time, she recognized herself not as a helpless girl, but as a capable, courageous young woman. That evening, they encountered a stranger, a lone traveler with a wary demeanor, carrying supplies on horseback. His eyes narrowed as he approached, sizing them up, and Takoda instinctively positioned himself between Lila and the man. "Who are you?" the stranger demanded, suspicion heavy in his tone. Lila listened carefully to every word, every inflection, and felt the tension in the stranger's posture. She realized that this encounter was different from natural disasters or wild animals. This was human unpredictability, complex, dangerous, and uncertain. Takoda's presence reassured her, but she also felt a surge of determination. She knew she could no longer be passive. Using her instincts, she spoke up, her voice calm but steady. "We mean no harm. We are travelers, like you." The stranger's eyes flicked to her, surprised by the confidence in her tone. For the first time, Lila felt the power of her own voice, her own presence, shaping the course of events. The stranger hesitated, then nodded slowly, sensing their sincerity. Lila felt a rush of pride and relief. She had navigated the encounter successfully, relying entirely on her training, intuition, and courage. Takoda's hand rested briefly on her shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of her growth. As night fell, they camped together under a blanket of stars, Lila reflecting on the day's events. She had faced nature, predators, and now human suspicion, and survived them all. Each challenge had tested her, shaped her, and revealed her inner strength. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Lila felt ready for whatever lay ahead. The morning sun broke over the horizon, casting golden light across the endless plains. Lila felt a growing excitement mixed with tension. Today they would face the most dangerous part of their journey yet, a wide, rushing river that cut through the land like a silver ribbon. She had heard the water before, the roar of it carried on the wind, and now the reality pressed against her senses. The ground trembled slightly beneath the river's current, and the rhythmic rush of the water sent vibrations through the earth that she could feel through the horse's hooves. Takoda stopped at the riverbank, listening intently, assessing the best crossing. "The current is strong, but the horse can manage it," he said quietly. "You must trust it. And trust yourself." Lila's heart quickened. She had learned much about navigating danger, but this felt different, terrifying in a new way. She had to act, not just follow. Carefully, Takoda guided the horse to the shallow edge. The water was icy, its force tugging at the animal's legs with every step. Lila gripped the horse's mane tightly, her senses alert to the horse's balance, the flow of water, and Takoda's soft instructions. Step by step, they moved forward, the current tugging and twisting around them, threatening to pull them downstream. Lila felt the tension in the horse's muscles, the vibrations of the river through the hooves, and she adjusted her weight instinctively, keeping herself steady. Halfway across, a sudden surge of water hit the horse's side, knocking it slightly off balance. Lila's heart leapt. She pressed closer, listening carefully to Takoda's voice. "Lean with the movement, steady your grip," he shouted over the roar of the river. Lila obeyed, tilting her body, feeling the rhythm of the horse, trusting in the connection they had developed over days of travel. Slowly, painfully, they inched forward, each step a test of courage and focus. The river seemed endless, each moment stretching with the tension of survival. Lila's mind raced, yet a strange clarity settled over her. She could sense the depths, the obstacles beneath the surface, and even the small currents threatening to knock the horse off course. Her hands brushed the mane, her body moved in harmony with the animal, and she realized something remarkable. She was not helpless. She was capable, attuned, and alive in a way she had never known. Finally, with a last surge of effort, the horse scrambled onto the opposite bank. The river behind them roared and churned, but they had crossed safely. Lila exhaled deeply, the exhilaration mingling with relief. Takoda smiled at her, pride shining in his eyes. "You did well," he said. "You trusted yourself, and that made all the difference." For Lila, the experience was transformative. She had faced one of nature's most formidable challenges and had emerged not only unscathed but empowered. Each obstacle along the journey, whether earthquake, predator, or skeptical stranger, had taught her to rely on her instincts, her courage, and her senses. The river had confirmed that she could survive in the wild, that she could navigate danger, and that she was no longer the frightened, helpless girl abandoned by Red Willow Dot as they set up camp on the far side of the river. Lila's fingers traced the contours of the land, feeling the subtle shifts in terrain and the pulse of the earth beneath her. Takoda built a small fire, and she listened to the crackle of flames, the distant calls of birds, and the gentle lapping of the river. All of it was a symphony of life, a world she had once been barred from experiencing fully. That night, under a sky filled with stars, Lila whispered softly to Takoda, "I never knew I could feel this alive." He placed a hand on her shoulder, a simple gesture of affirmation. "You are alive, Lila, and this is only the beginning." For the first time, she truly believed it. The journey had tested her body, her mind, and her spirit, and she had passed. The plains were vast, the challenges many, but Lila felt ready. With Takoda by her side and her own courage guiding her, she was no longer a girl defined by what she could not see. She was a survivor, a learner, and a force quietly, steadily awakening to her own power. The plains stretched endlessly before them, golden waves of grass rippling in the afternoon sun. Lila had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the journey, the wind on her face, the horse beneath her, the subtle vibrations in the earth that guided her. But nothing could have prepared her for the danger that awaited them over the next rise. Takoda had noticed the faint glint of metal in the distance rifles, knives, and the telltale shimmer of hostile intent. A band of outlaws had set up an ambush along the narrow pass. Lila's heart raced as she felt the tension in the horse beneath her. Its muscles coiled, sensing the same threat she could not see. For the first time, Takoda did not take the lead. He looked at Lila seriously. "You must listen, learn, and trust yourself," he said. "Today you will need to act as more than a passenger." The outlaws spotted them and shouted, their voices carrying across the valley. Takoda nudged the horse into a slow, deliberate pace, teaching Lila to feel every step, every shift in balance, every subtle movement. She pressed her hands along the mane, sensing the horse's reaction to uneven ground and the vibrations of approaching footsteps. Her mind worked quickly, mapping the sounds, predicting the movements, and anticipating the danger dot. As the outlaws blocked their path, Takoda drew his bow. Lila remembered the lessons he had imparted, the importance of calm observation, the power of instinct, and the need to act decisively. She felt her own heartbeat synchronize with the horse's, and a strange clarity settled over her. She could sense the safest paths, the points where the horse could step without stumbling, and the subtle gaps in the outlaws' formation. When Takoda fired his first arrow, Lila instinctively leaned forward, guiding the horse through a narrow opening in the rocks. The horse moved with precision, stepping where she anticipated, weaving around obstacles and debris. The outlaws shouted and lunged, but the horse, guided by Lila's hands and instincts, slipped through the chaos. She realized she was no longer merely following, she was part of the strategy, a participant in their escape. One of the outlaws tried to grab at her, but Lila felt the motion through the horse's movement and twisted her body instinctively, dodging the hand without needing sight. Takoda glanced at her and nodded, a silent affirmation of her growing skill and courage. The bond between rider and horse, and between Lila and Takoda, had strengthened to an unspoken rhythm that allowed them to move as one through danger. By the time they cleared the ambush, Lila's chest was heaving, her hands bruised from gripping the mane, but her mind was alive with exhilaration. She had faced real human danger, calculated, cruel, and unpredictable, and survived through observation, intuition, and trust in herself. The outlaws had been defeated not by force alone, but by the synergy between Lila, the horse, and Takoda's guidance. That night, as they made camp under a sky ablaze with stars, Lila felt a quiet pride unlike anything she had known. She traced her fingers over the horse's muscles, feeling the animal's warmth and strength, and realized that she had grown in ways she could never have imagined in Red Willow. She was no longer the blind girl left behind by her village. She was a survivor, a strategist, and a young woman capable of action in the face of real danger. Takoda watched her, his eyes reflecting firelight and admiration. "Today, you proved yourself," he said softly. "Not just with courage, but with awareness and skill. You are learning faster than I ever expected." Lila smiled, a small, confident curve of her lips. For the first time, she truly believed that she could meet whatever the plains and life might throw at her. As the night deepened, the wind whispered through the tall grasses. Lila felt the pulse of the world beneath her, a symphony of life and danger she could now navigate. The journey had tested her body, mind, and spirit, and she had emerged stronger, braver, and more alive. The plains were no longer a place of uncertainty, they were her proving ground, and she was ready for whatever lay ahead. The morning sun filtered softly through the sparse clouds, and the plains stretched endlessly, golden and alive. Lila's senses had grown sharper with every passing day. She could feel the vibrations of the earth, hear the slightest shift in the wind, and sense the rhythms of life around her in a way that made her feel almost part of the land itself. The journey with Takoda had transformed her, not only teaching her to survive but revealing strengths she had never known she possessed. That day, as they rode through a wide valley dotted with wildflowers, Lila sensed something new and unusual rustling near the edge of the path. Her fingers brushed the horse's mane as she leaned slightly, listening with full attention. "What is it?" she asked softly, her voice barely above the whisper of the wind. Takoda paused, tilting his head in thought. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but trust what you feel." Encouraged by his words, Lila focused her attention entirely, feeling the vibrations in the ground and following the subtle shifts in the air. Slowly, a pattern emerged. It was small animals, moving quickly and quietly, but together, creating a complex soundscape that her trained senses could untangle. Her attention then shifted to a nearby cluster of rocks. She felt a tiny shift under her fingertips on the horse's mane. Something had moved that was not part of the natural flow of the animals. "There's someone, or something hiding there," she murmured. Takoda's eyes widened slightly. "Show me." Guided by Lila's instincts, they approached cautiously. A young boy, no older than 10, stumbled out from the rocks, frightened and hungry. His clothes were torn, and his hands bore scrapes from the harsh terrain. Lila's heart swelled with empathy. "It's okay," she whispered. "We won't hurt you." The boy froze, then gradually relaxed, sensing the calm in her voice and the steady presence of Takoda. Over the next few hours, Lila discovered something remarkable, not just her ability to detect hidden threats, but a new capacity to communicate, guide, and protect. She directed Takoda and the boy safely through the uneven terrain, using her acute senses to navigate tricky paths and warn of obstacles before they became dangers. The boy looked at her with awe. "You can see everything," he said hesitantly. Lila smiled softly. "Not with my eyes. With my senses, my mind, and my heart." Takoda's gaze lingered on her, pride evident in his expression. "You have learned more than I could have hoped," he said. "You are no longer just surviving, you are leading." Lila felt a warmth she had never experienced. In Red Willow, the pride of realizing her abilities were not limitations, but extraordinary strengths. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, they found a safe place to camp near a small stream. Lila taught the boy to listen to the flow of water, to feel the wind, and to sense the land around him. She realized that her journey was no longer just about survival, it was about guidance, teaching and sharing what she had learned. That night, as Takoda built the fire, Lila sat quietly, feeling the land's subtle movements beneath her fingertips. She thought of Red Willow, of the fear and cruelty she had endured there, and of the boundless possibilities that now stretched before her. The plains were no longer a place of danger alone, they were a canvas for her growth, a landscape where she could harness her abilities, find strength, and help others along the way. For the first time, Lila recognized a truth she had not known before. Blindness was not her weakness. Her senses, her courage, her ability to adapt and guide were powers she had only begun to understand. She had discovered a hidden talent not just for sensing the world, but for shaping it, protecting those who could not protect themselves, and forging a path where none had believed she could walk. Takoda's voice broke through her thoughts. "You are ready for anything, Lila. You see the world in ways few ever will." She smiled, feeling a deep certainty. The plains, the journey, and her own inner strength had taught her that she was more than anyone in Red Willow had imagined, and more than even she had imagined herself. The morning air was crisp and still, carrying the faint scent of wild sage and damp earth from the nearby stream. Lila led the way, confident in her senses and instincts, guiding Takoda and the young boy through a narrow gorge. She had become adept at reading subtle changes in the terrain, the vibration of loose stones, the whisper of wind against jagged rocks, even the faintest rustle of hidden wildlife. Her confidence had grown steadily, but today, the plains would test her like never before. Without warning, a thunderous crash echoed through the gorge. Rocks loosened from the cliffs above, tumbling toward them with terrifying speed. Takoda shouted warnings, but Lila reacted instantly. She leaned with the rhythm of the horse, listening carefully to the vibrations of falling debris, and guided it to a small ledge just out of the main path of danger. Her instincts, honed over weeks of travel, allowed her to anticipate the trajectory of the rocks with uncanny precision. The young boy clung to the horse, wide-eyed, but Lila's calm voice soothed him. "Stay still. Trust me." She felt the horse tense beneath her, and she adjusted her weight, shifting slightly to keep them balanced. Step by careful step, they navigated the treacherous terrain. Lila realized that this moment was the culmination of everything Takoda had taught her: trust, focus, courage, and the ability to act decisively. Suddenly, A particularly large boulder broke free and rolled straight toward Takoda, who was momentarily caught off guard. Lila's hands tightened on the horse's mane as she shouted directions, urging the animal forward to clear the path. Takoda scrambled just in time, and the boulder crashed behind them, sending dust and pebbles into the air. Heart pounding, Lila felt a surge of pride mixed with relief. She had guided them through a real, life-threatening situation entirely on her own. Once the immediate danger passed, Takoda dismounted and examined her closely. "Lila, you saved us," he said, awe in his voice. "You anticipated the rocks, guided the horse, and kept us all safe. You acted as one with the land and the animal." Lila's cheeks flushed with a mixture of pride and humility. I just trusted what I could feel. The ground, the horse, the sounds around me. It all spoke to me." The young boy, still clinging to the horse, looked at her with admiration. "You can really see everything," he said, his voice trembling slightly. Lila smiled, realizing that her blindness had never been a limitation. It had been a different kind of vision, one that allowed her to understand the world in ways others could not. As the gorge opened into a wide valley, the three travelers paused to rest. Lila ran her hands over the contours of the land, feeling the subtle dips and rises, the flow of the nearby stream, and the patterns of vegetation. Every detail was a story, a map that she could navigate without sight, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of her abilities. That night, by the fire, Takoda spoke softly, his voice filled with pride. "You are no longer just learning, Lila. You are becoming a protector, a guide, and a force of your own. I can step back now and let you lead when needed." Lila's heart swelled. She had begun the journey as a girl shunned by her village, abandoned to a life of fear and dependence. Now, she was emerging as someone capable, powerful, and trusted. As the stars glittered overhead, Lila reflected on her transformation. The plains had tested her relentlessly through disasters, predators, and human threats, but each challenge had revealed new strengths within her. She had learned to trust herself, to act decisively, and to feel the world in a way that no one in Red Willow could have imagined. For the first time, she believed not only in survival, but in her ability to thrive, and as she settled beside the fire, listening to the gentle murmurs of the creek and the low snorts of the horse, Lila realized something profound. She had found her vision, her power, and her place in a world that once had no place for her. The journey was far from over, but she was ready for whatever lay ahead. The plains stretched endlessly before them, bathed in the soft glow of dawn. Lila felt the familiar rhythm of the horse beneath her, the wind brushing her face, and the subtle vibrations of the earth beneath each hoofbeat. She had come a long way from the frightened girl left behind in Red Willow. The journey had tested her body, mind, and spirit, and through each challenge, she had discovered a power within herself she never knew existed. Takoda led the way toward a hidden valley he had spoken of, a place of safety, belonging, and freedom. As they approached, Lila felt the land change beneath her fingers. The soil was softer, the air warmer, and the scent of wildflowers richer. She could sense a community waiting, not hostile like Red Willow, but alive, vibrant, and welcoming. Her heart stirred with a mixture of anticipation and relief. The valley opened into a lush landscape, dotted with small cabins and fields where families tended crops and animals roamed freely. Children ran and laughed, and Lila could feel the sense of harmony in the air. She realized, even before her senses confirmed it, that this was a place where she could belong, a place where her blindness would not define her, but her abilities, courage, and heart would. Takoda stopped at the edge of a stream that ran through the valley and dismounted. "This is your new home, Lila," he said softly. "A place where you are valued and where your strengths will guide you." Lila's fingers trembled slightly as she touched the cool water, feeling its steady flow. She took a deep breath and allowed herself to absorb the moment fully. The journey had been long, fraught with danger, and at times she had doubted herself, but now she could feel her own strength radiating from within. The first villagers approached, wary at first, then smiling as they sensed her calm, confident presence. Lila realized that she no longer needed to rely solely on Takoda. She had learned to navigate the world, anticipate danger, and guide others when needed. Her senses, honed by weeks of travel and survival, allowed her to connect with the land and people in ways no one else could as she settled into her new home. Lila began teaching the young boy and other children to sense the world around them, to feel the land and the animals, and to trust their instincts. She guided Takoda through moments where her intuition revealed threats or opportunities he had not noticed, and together they became a team recognized for their harmony with the land and each other. That evening, as the sun set and painted the valley in shades of gold and rose, Lila stood beside the horse, running her hands along its strong neck. She thought of Red Willow, of the fear and rejection that had defined her life there, and of the Apache who had lifted her onto his horse and shown her a different path. She realized that she had not just survived the journey, she had transformed. She had discovered independence, courage, and purpose, and in the process, she had found a family in Takoda and a community that welcomed her. Takoda approached, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You are more than anyone imagined," he said. "Stronger, wiser, and capable of great things. This is your world now." Lila smiled, a smile full of confidence and peace. "Yes," she whispered, "it is my world, and I will live it fully." As night fell, Lila listened to the quiet symphony of the valley, the rustle of leaves, the gentle flow of the stream, the distant laughter of children. For the first time in her life, she felt completely at home. She was no longer the blind girl abandoned by Red Willow. She was a survivor, a teacher, a guide, and a young woman who had discovered her own power. The plains, once vast and daunting, had become a place of freedom, growth, and limitless possibility, and with Takoda by her side, Lila knew that no challenge, no fear, and no limitation could ever define her again. She had found her vision not through sight, but through strength, courage, and heart, and it would guide her for the rest of her life.